What if everything you've been taught about desire, love, and connection is quietly leading you away from your true self? Listen carefully as we uncover the sacred power of abstinence, not as denial, but as a path to profound clarity and real intimacy. Stay until the end, and you may never see silence, stillness, or love the same way again. There arrives a moment when silence echoes louder than any spoken word, when longing dissolves into stillness, and what emerges is not craving, but the deeper pulse of your soul remembering its strength. We exist in a world driven by pursuit, consumption, and endless stimulation. But how often are we truly taught the art of pausing? In that pause lies an ancient awakening. Not the fear of missing out, but the liberation of tuning inward. Abstinence is not rooted in denial. It is a rediscovery. A sacred practice where the body grows quiet enough for the soul to finally speak. It is in that stillness that you begin to hear again, not with your ears, but with your inner being. The frantic echoes of society's demands begin to fade, replaced by something purer, something closer to the truth of your essence. The stillness does not erase your humanity, it refines it. You become aware of the subtle textures of your inner world, the unspoken longings, the overlooked truths. This is the subtle terrain that abstinence opens up. It is not about control for the sake of control. It is about discovering what lies underneath the noise. And the discovery is deeply personal. It is unique to your own journey, your past wounds, your unmet needs, your hidden strengths. As you sit with yourself in moments of intentional abstinence, you begin to feel where you have abandoned yourself in the past. You begin to see the ways you've used pleasure not as joy but as escape. And in that realization, you are offered a choice, not shame, but a new direction. Abstinence gives you a chance to choose again, to return to yourself, to recover dignity, sovereignty, and soul. When most people hear the word abstinence, they immediately think of sacrifice, of what must be withheld or given up. Yet for those on the path of inner mastery, abstinence is not a barren desert. It is a fertile garden. It is not about the void of something, but the redirection of everything. Every ounce of energy, each breath of attention, every flicker of desire is no longer dissipated outward, but gathered inward. And in that inward gathering, something profound occurs. The chaos softens, the storm settles, and the quiet voice within begins to rise. This voice is not loud, it does not shout for attention. It whispers, and in that whisper is guidance, in that whisper is wisdom. But to hear it, you must first become still. You must slow down the momentum of a world obsessed with more and listen instead to the rhythm of your own being. Abstinence helps create that space. It's not a punishment, it's a pause. A space where the noise ends and clarity begins. And from that clarity, life reorganizes itself. You see things differently, you relate differently, you begin to live from your center. In truth, abstinence is not merely an action, it is an attitude. It is the courageous stance of saying, I will not be ruled by every impulse. I will not let my hunger lead me blindly. Instead, you turn inward, and with each moment of restraint, you begin to recover lost pieces of yourself. The parts that were fragmented by overstimulation, the parts that were scattered chasing validation, attention, comfort. And as those fragments return, you begin to feel whole again. It is not that desire vanishes, it transforms. What was once restlessness becomes reverence. What was once craving becomes clarity. This transformation is subtle, but profound. Instead of needing the world to satisfy your emptiness, you begin to see the world as a mirror. You begin to ask new questions. What am I truly seeking? Is this desire rooted in truth or trauma? And most importantly, am I moving from wholeness or from lack? These are not questions of the mind alone, they are questions of the soul. And the answers are only heard in silence. Abstinence is the sacred container that gives rise to those answers. It is the soil from which inner wisdom blooms. Eastern wisdom teaches us that energy is never wasted, it is transformed. The body, the mind, and the spirit are not separate, they are a unified flow. When we practice abstinence, not from guilt or repression, but from understanding, we begin to gather chi, life force. When this vital energy is no longer scattered in indulgence or impulsivity, it begins to consolidate within. And where does it go? It fortifies the architecture of your inner clarity, awareness, and presence. Abstinence becomes the crucible in which focus is forged. Focus in this light is not a narrowing of attention. It is a rooting, a grounding. It is when you can finally sit within yourself without reaching for escape. It is when you can look someone in the eyes and not need anything from them. It is when your presence speaks louder than your words. This type of presence cannot be faked. It is felt, and it is built through abstinence. Each time you refrain from compulsive action, you build presence. Each time you pause instead of pounce, you expand your inner container. To be present in this way is to be powerful without forceful. It is to walk into a room and bring stillness, not because you command it, but because you embody it. This kind of presence is magnetic, not because it seeks attention, but because it radiates authenticity. And authenticity is rare in a world that rewards performance. Abstinence strips away the performative layers. It brings you face to face with your raw, unfiltered self. And in that encounter, something remarkable happens. You stop needing to be impressive, you start choosing to be real. I once met a man in his late 50s who had spent his life chasing connection. 3 marriages and not a single moment truly alone. Always moving from one partner to the next, constantly seeking, never pausing. He told me, I've spent my life chasing something I couldn't name, but I never once just stopped. And so he did the unthinkable. He embraced a full year of abstinence. No intimacy, no dating, no seeking. What followed was not a descent into loneliness, but an awakening. He heard his breath again. He felt his feet against the ground, and in that stillness, he met the version of himself that had been buried beneath the noise. He said, "Now I love from fullness, not from hunger." This is abstinence as redirection, not starvation, but inner strength. His journey was not linear. There were days of aching, of questioning, of temptation to return to the familiar. But he held the course, not perfectly, but faithfully. He learned that abstinence isn't about perfection, it's about presence. And in that presence, he uncovered insights he never would have found in another person's arms. He rediscovered his boundaries, he reclaimed his joy. He met parts of himself that had been waiting quietly all these years, simply waiting for the noise to die down so they could speak. He began to realize that his past relationships, though meaningful in moments, had often been built on a foundation of incompleteness. He had entered them hoping to be filled, to be rescued, to be mirrored into wholeness. But abstinence stripped him of that illusion. It left only him and the truth of his being. And that truth he discovered was more powerful than he had imagined. He learned to sit in silence, not with resentment, but with reverence. He began to walk differently, speak more intentionally, breathe more deeply. He carried himself not with arrogance, but with quiet dignity. The dignity that comes from no longer needing to be needed. Modern neuroscience affirms what ancient wisdom has long known. The brain, when exposed to constant stimulation, becomes conditioned to chase reward. Dopamine loops form, pleasure becomes compulsive. But through abstinence, especially from excessive emotional or sensory stimulation, the brain begins to reset. Neural pathways reorganize. The dopamine system stabilizes. Mental clarity sharpens. Emotional balance returns. The monks knew it through silence. Today we call it neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is not merely a cognitive function, it is a spiritual opportunity. It allows the rewiring of not just behavior, but of belief. The belief that you must always be connected to be worthy, that you must always be desired to be valuable. Abstinence interrupts this cycle. It offers you the rare chance to sit with the discomfort that arises when validation is removed, and to discover that you are still here, still whole, still enough. This process is deeply empowering. When you choose abstinence not as rejection, but as redirection, you begin to experience a new kind of sovereignty. You become the one who decides where your energy flows, who receives your presence, and what kind of connections align with your truth. The need to constantly engage fades. The urge to constantly respond softens. And in that softening, a new rhythm emerges. One that is more aligned with your essence, not your conditioning. Why does this matter in relationships? Because the nervous system regulates presence, and presence is the foundation of intimacy. Not touch, not words, but grounded, spacious presence. When you're whole within, your partner doesn't need to complete you, they get to meet you. Abstinence is not rejection, it is refinement. You refine your energy before offering it to another. You become magnetic, not through performance, but through stillness, like a mountain that calls the clouds. Presence, in this context, becomes more than a quality. It becomes a commitment, a daily devotion to being rooted, to being fully where you are, to not react out of fear, but to respond from your center. This kind of presence is rare because it is hard-earned. It is the result of sitting with your loneliness, breathing through your frustration, holding space for your longing without immediately feeding it. And yet, it is this very presence that makes true connection possible. True connection is not born in the moment of touch, but in the space before it. The space where intention dwells, where self-awareness leads. Presence allows you to notice, to attune, to hear not just what someone says, but what their silence means. It is what enables a deeper form of listening, one that transcends language and reaches the heart. Without presence, relationships become transactions. With presence, they become transmissions of safety, of truth, of soul. There is a story from the Taoist tradition of a young disciple who was enamored with a village girl. He felt his desire for her consuming him. One day, his master noticed that he had become distracted in his training. So he brought him to a well in the forest. The master said, "Stare into the water. What do you see?" The disciple said, "My reflection." Then the master dropped a stone into the well. The water rippled. "Now what do you see?" "Nothing, only waves." The master smiled. "That is your mind when consumed by desire, distorted, unclear. Wait." They waited in silence. Eventually, the water stilled again. "Now my reflection returns." Reverently, the master placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Abstinence is not to suppress desire, but to still the mind enough that you can see yourself clearly. Only then will you know whether what you seek is love or illusion." This ancient story is not simply about romantic desire. It is about the nature of clarity. When the waters of your inner world are in constant motion, stirred by every external influence, your reflection, your understanding of yourself becomes blurred. But when you cultivate stillness, when you create space through abstinence, the waves begin to settle. And in the stillness, you do not just see, you understand. You recognize patterns. You detect the subtle differences between fantasy and feeling, between impulse and insight. This is wisdom born of presence.
Well, the lesson here is timeless. Without inner stillness, we do not know what we truly want. And without clarity, our relationships become mirrors of confusion. When the body is always in motion, always chasing, touching, reacting, it leaves no room for the soul to speak. But when we bring the body into stillness, when we discipline our desires, not through force, but through wisdom, something extraordinary happens. The soul begins to communicate through sensation, through breath, through intuition. You begin to feel when someone is genuine, when their words match their energy. You begin to sense emotional undercurrents that were once invisible. This is not magic, it is sensitivity. And sensitivity is not weakness, it is a higher intelligence. It allows you to navigate relationships with grace, to sense when someone is hurting without them saying a word, to know when to speak and when to remain silent. This level of attunement is only possible when your own inner world is not drowned in noise. To live this way is to reclaim the sacredness of your attention. It is to become a guardian of your own nervous system, a steward of your own emotional landscape. Abstinence is the gatekeeper. It is what allows you to notice the difference between reaction and response, between performance and authenticity. And once you have tasted the peace that comes from this way of being, you no longer crave the chaos of constant stimulation. You begin to find pleasure in presence itself. You begin to discover that true connection is less about excitement and more about resonance. Resonance cannot be forced. It is the natural harmony that arises when two beings meet from a place of fullness rather than need. And this resonance is delicate. It can only be sensed when you are truly tuned in, not distracted by inner noise or driven by unconscious patterns. Abstinence is what sharpens this ability. It is what teaches you to feel with your whole being, to listen not just with your ears, but with your body, with your breath, with your intuition. There's another example from a woman in her 40s who had recently ended a long-term relationship. She found herself emotionally drained and unsure of her identity. She decided to take 6 months of emotional abstinence, not just physical celibacy, but a complete pause from romantic or emotionally charged connections. No dating apps, no texting late into the night, no replaying what could have been. Instead, she turned inward. She began journaling, practicing breath work, taking walks without headphones, learning to sit with her own company. At first, she said it felt like withdrawal, like she was missing a limb. But slowly, she realized that what she had been addicted to wasn't love, it was distraction. The distraction of another person's validation, the comfort of not having to face her own emptiness. But in the silence, her creativity returned. Her laughter came back. She wrote, "I thought I had lost myself in the relationship, but truthfully, I had never fully met myself until now." This is the transformation that abstinence can unlock. When the noise stops, what emerges is not silence, it is self. In psychology, this relates to the concept of interoception, our ability to perceive the internal state of our body. Individuals who practice mindful abstinence often report heightened interoceptive awareness. They become more attuned to their breath, their heartbeat, their energy shifts. And with this awareness comes emotional regulation. You begin to notice when anxiety arises before it overwhelms you. You recognize the tightness in your chest before the argument escalates. You respond rather than react. And in relationships, this creates an environment of safety and respect. Abstinence then becomes a form of emotional hygiene. Just as we fast to give the body rest, we abstain to give the heart space to cleanse the subtle toxins of past disappointments, old attachments,
and unconscious patterns. And this space is not a void, it is sacred. It is where your inner compass is recalibrated. That recalibration affects everything. How you speak, how you listen, how you sit across from someone and hold eye contact without flinching or pretending. It influences the way you touch, the way you walk, the way you rest. Because everything becomes a reflection of your inner state. Abstinence refines that state. It hones it into clarity, into a depth that no amount of external affirmation can replace. And from that depth, a new kind of life begins to emerge, not faster, not louder, but truer. And in truth, you become free. In Eastern medicine, the kidneys are seen as the root of life force. They govern our willpower, our inner stamina. Excessive indulgence, especially in sexual activity without grounding, is believed to deplete this energy. But through periods of conscious abstinence, the kidneys are replenished, the will becomes strong again, and from this strength arises clarity, not just about others, but about your purpose. Abstinence becomes a way to plug the leaks in your energy field, to repair the vessel that carries your vitality. And when your vessel is whole, what you offer to others is no longer tinged with desperation or depletion, but with dignity and devotion. So, what does this mean in everyday life? It means that when you find yourself constantly needing someone else's attention to feel good, pause. When you notice you're always seeking touch, conversation, or connection to avoid loneliness, pause. When your desire becomes frantic, when your mind races toward, what if they leave? Or what if I'm not enough? Pause. Not to punish yourself, but to listen, because underneath that urgency is often a quieter truth, a need that cannot be met from the outside. And here lies one of the most powerful realizations abstinence can deliver. That many of the emotions we project outward are messengers pointing us inward. That the ache for validation is often a call for self-recognition. That the longing for closeness may be a whisper to return to your own center. Abstinence allows you to make that return, not as an escape from love, but as a preparation for it. Because love, real love, does not bloom from emptiness, it blooms from wholeness shared. When the body is still, the soul begins to whisper, you are already whole. You do not need to be needed to be valuable. You can choose when and how to give your energy. You can love without losing yourself. This is where abstinence becomes liberation, not from others, but from dependency. It opens a space where love can grow not as attachment, but as offering. It teaches you the difference between wanting someone and needing them. And in that difference lies your power. As we transition from this place of energetic redirection, another principle emerges. The stillness of the body unlocks the language of the soul. You begin to see that silence is not absence. It is presence intensified. To live in presence is not to withdraw from life, but to enter it fully, without resistance, without distortion, and without the chaos of being ruled by your own emotions. Presence is the discipline of being wholly where you are. It is the quiet art of anchoring your attention, not letting it be pulled by memories, expectations, or the stimulation of the outside world. And yet, presence is not only for monks and sages. It is a vital skill in every relationship, in every conversation, and in every moment where a human heart seeks to be understood. Presence is not a performance, it is a vibration. When someone is truly present with you, you feel it. Their eyes are not darting elsewhere, their breath is calm, their nervous system is not threatening or grasping, but open and still. In their presence, you do not feel judged, nor do you feel invisible. You feel seen. This is not a mystery. It is physiology. Your nervous system, the vast web of communication between your brain, body, and environment, is designed to constantly scan for safety. This process, called neuroception, happens below the level of conscious thought. The moment you enter a room, meet a person, or hear a tone of voice, your body already knows whether to soften or tense, whether to open or defend. When you are present, your breath slows. Your shoulders drop, your voice steadies. You are no longer projecting future scenarios or rehashing past wounds. In this state, your parasympathetic nervous system, often referred to as the rest and digest system, becomes active. This system signals to your body and to others, it is safe here. And this sense of safety is not something you tell others, it's something they feel in your presence. You can't fake it with kind words or rehearsed affirmations. It's encoded in your nervous system. It radiates in your subtle movements, in your stillness, in your breath. It is the embodied truth that says, I am not here to fix you, I am here to see you. And in that seeing, healing happens. Not because you tried to be someone, but because you dared to be yourself, fully, honestly, unapologetically. In relationship dynamics, presence is the invisible thread that holds trust together. It is not the cleverness of your words, nor the depth of your feelings that makes someone feel secure. It is the regulation of your own internal state. When your nervous system is regulated, others feel that regulation. And this feeling, this embodied safety, is what allows people to open up, to share vulnerably, and to connect authentically. There is a story I once heard from a therapist who worked with couples on the verge of separation. One particular couple had been married for 20 years, but had become emotionally estranged. The wife said, "He's never really with me. Even when we talk, I feel alone." The husband, defensive and frustrated, said, "But I am here. I come home. I ask how your day was. What more do you want?" The therapist, instead of offering advice, asked them to try an experiment. "For the next 5 minutes," she said, "say nothing. Just face each other, really present. No fixing, no proving, no performing." They agreed. At first, they sat stiffly, but as the silence deepened, something shifted. The husband's posture softened, the wife's breathing slowed, tears welled in her eyes. When the timer ended, she whispered, This is what I've been missing. Not your words, you." This is the difference between physical proximity and emotional presence. One touches the body, the other touches the soul. And yet, presence does not happen by accident. It is cultivated, it is protected, and often it is born from abstinence, not necessarily from people, but from distractions, from the compulsive checking of messages, from the constant need to express opinions, from the craving to always be stimulated. True presence arises when we create space within ourselves, when we abstain from the mental noise long enough for stillness to become natural. Abstinence clears the clutter from the mind. It disentangles the spirit from the web of instant gratification. And in this space, the nervous system learns a new rhythm, one that is slow, steady, receptive. It no longer rushes to fill silences with words or gestures. It learns to simply be. And in that being, connection deepens. This is the soil where love grows, not in the storm of constant doing, but in the calm of true being. In Eastern martial arts, students are trained to regulate their breath before they ever strike. Why? Because breath is life. It is the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. When the breath is shallow, the mind becomes anxious. When the breath is deep and steady, the mind becomes anchored. This applies not only in combat, but in conflict in relationships. Every argument is a test of breath. Every tension is an invitation to stay rooted or to lose your center. Try this. The next time you are about to speak in a heated moment, pause. Take one slow, full breath through the nose. Feel the air enter your belly, not just your chest. Hold it, then release slowly. Ask yourself, am I speaking to connect or to control? Often this one breath is the difference between reaction and response, between wounding and understanding. That single breath can interrupt years of conditioned behavior. It becomes a wedge between impulse and action, a sanctuary of stillness in the chaos of reactivity. Breath is not just a tool, it is a teacher. It reminds you that you are not your emotions. You are the one who watches them arise and fall. In that space between the rise and fall, there is wisdom, there is choice, and choice is the foundation of freedom. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient wisdom has long known. Conscious breathing activates the vagus nerve, a key component of the parasympathetic system. This not only slows your heart rate and reduces cortisol, but also increases your ability to empathize. When you are calm, you can perceive nuance. You can sense the emotional layers beneath someone's words. You can respond not from the wound, but from the wisdom. Presence also has a posture. The body speaks a language that the mind cannot fake. When your spine is upright, when your chest is open, when your shoulders are relaxed, you emit confidence and openness, not arrogance, not submission, but a kind of natural dignity. This posture is not for show, it is a message to your nervous system. I am grounded, I am safe. Others feel this, especially children, especially partners who have been hurt. They know without knowing how they know whether you are truly with them, and they respond accordingly. There is a teacher of mine who used to say, the way you sit at the dinner table is how you sit in life. What he meant was that your body reveals your mind. If you're slouched, fidgeting, scrolling, or tense, then your mind is not calm. If your body is grounded, alert, yet at ease, then your mind is likely clear. This is why posture and breath are not small things. They are portals, gateways to a deeper state of consciousness. They help you to not only inhabit your body, but to honor it as the vessel of your awareness. And when your awareness becomes rooted, your relationships transform. They become places of safety, not struggle. They become altars, not battlegrounds. Let us now look more closely at another essential dimension of this journey, the building of emotional musculature through abstinence. Just as the body grows strong through resistance training, the emotional body grows strong through intentional restraint. Every time you choose not to lash out, not to indulge, not to chase after comfort in the form of unhealthy habits, you are strengthening your emotional core. And just like physical strength, emotional strength is not always visible, but it is always felt. There's a misconception that emotional freedom means doing whatever we feel, but in truth, that is emotional captivity. To be free emotionally is not to act on every feeling, but to be aware of them, to sit with them, and to choose a wise response. This is where abstinence becomes a discipline not just of the body, but of the heart. A young woman once shared her story of heartbreak. After being ghosted by someone she thought was serious, she felt a storm of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion, longing. Her initial urge was to text, to call, to confront, to post cryptic messages online. But something in her paused. She remembered a teaching from her meditation class: do not make a move until the water is clear. So she didn't act, she didn't react. Instead, she sat, she journaled, she cried, she breathed. She watched the waves rise and fall inside her. And after a few days, the need to reach out faded. What remained was something deeper: self-respect, clarity. She realized that her pain was real, but it did not have to own her. That choice not to act on impulse is what we call emotional musculature. It is strength of the highest order. In relationships, this strength is vital because love without discipline becomes attachment. And attachment, when unchecked, becomes dependence. But when you have trained your emotional muscles through abstinence, through pausing, through choosing, you bring to your relationships not need but offering, not hunger but presence. And this offering is powerful. It says to the other, I want you, but I do not need you to fill my void. I choose you not because I am incomplete, but because I am full and wish to share that fullness with you. This is the essence of sacred partnership. But let us not romanticize the process. Emotional abstinence, like physical training, is uncomfortable. It is the decision to sit with discomfort instead of distracting ourselves. It is the discipline of not sending the angry message, of not indulging the revenge fantasy, of not spiraling into old stories about being unloved. In these moments, the path forward is not always clear, but the practice is pause, breathe, observe. Just as a warrior trains in silence before facing battle, so must we train in stillness before we engage emotionally. This kind of training also rewires the brain. In psychological terms, when we resist the pull of impulsive emotional behavior, we strengthen the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, regulation, and foresight. Over time, this gives us greater control over our emotional impulses. Abstinence builds this capacity. Every time you choose not to indulge a harmful emotion, you are reprogramming your mind. You are teaching it that discomfort is not dangerous, that feeling something intensely does not mean you must act immediately. This delay, this pause, is the sacred space where growth happens. There was once a monk who said, every time you feel the fire rise within you, do not rush to put it out or to throw it at someone else. Let it burn inward. Let it warm your clarity. Then speak from the embers, not the flames. This kind of emotional transmutation is not suppression. It is alchemy. You do not deny the emotion, you use it, you channel it, you allow it to refine you. Abstinence then is not coldness, it is containment. It is the decision to become a vessel strong enough to hold intensity without spilling it carelessly onto others. This capacity is rare, but it is what makes someone dependable in love, not just passionate but trustworthy, not just emotionally expressive but emotionally intelligent. To reach this level of discipline is not to reject pleasure or love or connection. It is to honor them, to bring to them the strength of your inner mastery, to say, I do not need to possess you. I choose to relate to you as an equal, with presence, with patience, and with depth. It is in this soil that true intimacy grows, where hearts meet not in desperation but in devotion, where love is not a storm that sweeps you away, but a flame that warms and endures. When we speak of abstinence, many think only of denial, of what is withheld, what is renounced. But to the one who walks the inner path, abstinence is not emptiness, it is space. And space is not absence, it is potential.
It is the sacred gap between stimulus and response, between craving and action, between expectation and embodiment. When we speak of cultivating relational clarity through abstinence, we are not talking about avoiding relationships. We are talking about seeing them clearly, without distortion, without projection, without the smokescreen of unmet inner needs. In a world addicted to validation, to distraction, to hurried intimacy, abstinence becomes a form of purification. It clears the lenses through which we view others, and perhaps more importantly, it clears the mirror through which we view ourselves. When you remove yourself from the game of constant seeking, you begin to see how deeply entangled your identity was with pursuit. You see how often you reached outward, not because love was calling, but because your own voice was drowned. Abstinence creates a quiet field where that voice can return. And in that voice is not shame, but truth. A truth that says, I am still learning how to be with myself. And that is holy work. This is not the avoidance of love. It is the preparation for sacred connection, for the kind of bond that doesn't just feed your emotions, but nourishes your soul. What do you seek in another? Do you seek a witness or a rescuer? A partner or a placeholder for your pain? Without silence, how will you ever hear the difference? There is a quiet wisdom in solitude, but solitude alone is not enough. One must bring awareness into solitude. That is where the transformation happens. When the body goes silent and abstains from the usual patterns, touch, stimulation, flattery, performance, the soul begins to speak. And what it says is not always comforting. Sometimes it reveals how much of your desire for connection is actually a desire to escape yourself. A woman once shared that after a series of toxic relationships, she made a vow: no dating for a year. Not because she hated men, not because she gave up on love, but because she finally wanted to meet herself. I needed, she said, to know the sound of my own thoughts without someone else's opinion in my ear. I needed to learn what made me feel safe without begging for it. That year was not easy. The first months were full of loneliness, temptation, self-doubt. But something remarkable happened around the 6th month. She began to feel a new kind of peace. She no longer reached for her phone to feel silence. She no longer dressed to impress a stranger's gaze. She no longer shrank or stretched herself to match someone else's preference. She became clear, not only about what she wanted in a partner, but about what she was as a partner. This is the clarity that abstinence brings. It is not the kind that comes from thinking, but the kind that comes from being. In Eastern philosophy, the mind is likened to a lake. When agitated, it is impossible to see anything beneath the surface. Only when it becomes still do we gain insight into the depths. Relationships reflect this truth. When you enter them from a place of emotional turbulence, everything you see is distorted. You don't see the person as they are. You see what your nervous system hopes or fears they might be. Clarity through abstinence allows you to separate projection from perception. You no longer seek a savior, you seek someone you can meet soul to soul without masks. You don't demand that they complete you, you desire only that they walk beside you, whole in themselves. But clarity is not just a psychological state, it is also a physiological one. Your nervous system, when constantly flooded with stimulation, sexual, emotional, digital, loses its sensitivity. Just like a muscle that is overused becomes sore and numb, the emotional body, when overstimulated, becomes confused. It can no longer differentiate between real connection and addictive familiarity. Abstinence resets this. It detoxifies your inner receptors. It gives you back the ability to sense, not just with the mind, but with the body. Have you ever noticed how after fasting from sugar, even a piece of fruit tastes vibrant and sweet?
The same is true for emotional fasting. When you abstain from the numbing habits of performative dating, hollow compliments, and shallow intimacy, even a genuine conversation becomes rich. A simple touch feels profound. A shared silence feels sacred. But we must be willing to endure the initial discomfort. For many, abstinence reveals how much of their emotional life has been built on avoiding themselves. In that silence, old fears return, of not being lovable, of being invisible, of being abandoned. These fears do not come to punish you. They come to be seen, to be healed. If you always run into someone's arms to escape them, you will never know which wounds are yours to tend. A man once shared how his pattern of jumping from one relationship to the next finally broke after a 6-month practice of celibacy and solitude. I realized, he said, that I'd never once asked myself what I value in a woman beyond attraction. I was so afraid of being alone that I confused chemistry with compatibility, lust with love, her presence with my worth. When he finally returned to the world of dating, he moved slowly. He asked deeper questions. He listened not just to words, but to energy. And most importantly, he listened to himself. Abstinence had given him more than control. It had given him discernment. And discernment is the beginning of wisdom in love. Without it, we are driven by impulse, fantasy, and fear. With it, we make choices that honor both self and other. And this wisdom, once cultivated, becomes your compass. It does not guarantee that you will never be hurt again or that love will always go smoothly, but it ensures that your choices are rooted not in avoidance or fantasy, but in awareness. It ensures that when you give your heart, you do so with your eyes open, with your breath steady, with your soul anchored in truth. Abstinence is what allows you to reach that state. It is the sacred space where all your pieces are gathered and harmonized. Now consider this. The kind of partner you attract is often a reflection of the kind of energy you radiate. When your energy is chaotic, unclear, and needy, you attract those who thrive on that instability. But when your energy is calm, rooted and self-sourced, you begin to attract people who are similarly aligned. Abstinence trains you to cultivate that energy. It teaches you to generate love from within so that love from outside becomes a complement, not a crutch. In Chinese medicine, we often speak of Jing, the foundational life essence. This essence is diminished by excess, by indulgence, by scattering one's energy in too many directions. But it is replenished through stillness, breath work, sexual restraint, and inner cultivation. A person whose Jing is strong is magnetic. They do not chase attention, they attract it. Not through strategy, but through substance. In relationship, this translates to presence. People sense it. They may not understand why they feel so safe, so drawn to you, but they do. And often it is because you are no longer leaking energy, you are whole. It is this wholeness that creates resonance. Not perfection, but presence. Not control, but clarity. And in this space of inner alignment, even the challenges that arise in love are met with grace. Because you are no longer trying to manipulate the external to soothe the internal, you are rooted in a self that is already enough. From here, intimacy becomes a sacred dance, not a desperate chase. It becomes an unfolding, not a grasping. This is the beauty abstinence can make space for. The beauty of choosing love not from lack, but from fullness. The next step in this unfolding journey of abstinence and self-mastery is deeply connected to relational integrity, the cultivation of sacred intention. This is the awareness not only of what you are choosing, but why. Most people enter relationships blindly, driven by hormones, loneliness, or social pressure. They attach without understanding the deeper impact of their choices. But sacred intention transforms this. It brings consciousness to connection. Every act of intimacy becomes a choice not just to experience pleasure,
but to exchange energy. Not just to be seen, but to see. Not just to take, but to offer. This intention requires abstinence to be truly understood. For when you abstain, you observe, you reflect. You ask questions not usually asked in the rush of desire. Is my attraction rooted in truth or trauma? Am I drawn to this person because they reflect my highest values or because they soothe my oldest wounds? Sacred intention is about direction. It's about asking, where is this connection leading us, individually and together? It is not about control or certainty, but about clarity of movement. If the connection brings both people closer to their inner truth, it is sacred. If it leads to self-betrayal, it is a warning. There's a well-known quote from Rumi: try not to resist the changes that come your way. Instead, let life live through you. Sacred intention does not resist change, but neither does it abandon discernment. It understands that not all chemistry is meant to be chased. Some energies are meant to teach you something and then pass through. There was once a woman who met a man during her yoga teacher training. They had instant chemistry, conversations that flowed, eyes that lingered, laughter that felt effortless. But something in her had changed. After years of deep healing, of practicing celibacy, of strengthening her emotional boundaries, she had become sensitive to energy. So instead of rushing into a relationship, she waited. She observed. And over time, she noticed that while their conversations were beautiful, his actions were inconsistent. He often disappeared emotionally, avoided deeper questions, and was vague about his intentions. In the past, she would have ignored these signs, hoping that chemistry would overcome confusion. But now, with sacred intention guiding her, she chose to step back. She honored the attraction, but she honored herself more. And in so doing, she remained in alignment not just with her desires, but with her integrity. This is the power of abstinence. It sharpens your inner compass. It teaches you not to sacrifice your peace for temporary pleasure. It teaches you that the quality of your relationship with yourself sets the standard for every other bond in your life. To cultivate sacred intention also means to become mindful of the rituals you bring into connection. How do you touch? How do you listen? How do you show up, not just on the good days, but on the difficult ones? Intimacy in its highest form is a spiritual practice. It is not something you fall into by accident. It is something you walk into with devotion. And devotion requires discipline. There is an old Zen story of a monk who was asked how he approached every interaction. He said, I enter each moment with three things: attention, respect, and emptiness. Attention to truly see, respect to honor the other's humanity, emptiness to not let my past cloud this meeting. What would relationships look like if we entered them this way? Abstinence prepares us for such an approach. It clears out the residue of past lovers, past mistakes, past versions of ourselves. It makes room, and into that room, intention flows like a stream, gentle, clear, and unstoppable. The soul does not rush. It waits until the waters are still. Then it speaks. And when it speaks, it does not offer commands, it offers clarity. This clarity is what transforms abstinence from deprivation into devotion. It is no longer about what you are avoiding,
but about what you are preparing to receive. To walk this path is not to become cold or detached. It is to become deeply warm, but wisely guarded, not closed, but selective, not hardened, but refined. In this way, abstinence becomes an act of love, not just for others, but for yourself. It becomes a sacred commitment. I will not settle. I will not self-abandon. I will not dilute my energy to fit into what no longer honors my truth. And from this place, real love can grow. Not the kind that burns fast and disappears, but the kind that roots itself deep into the soil of your being and blooms season after season with strength, softness, and soul. When the body goes silent, the soul speaks, not with noise, but with knowing. This journey through abstinence has never truly been about denial. It has always been about remembrance, remembering who you are when no one is watching, remembering what you value when nothing is distracting, remembering that your deepest needs are not met through constant stimulation, but through stillness, clarity, and presence. In the silence of abstinence, you begin to hear the truth that the noise of the world drowns out, that you are not empty when alone, you are whole, that love is not something to chase, it is something to align with, that intimacy is not measured by closeness of bodies, but by the honesty of souls. You have learned that every moment of abstinence, sexual, emotional, or even digital, is not a loss but a return to self-discipline, a return to sacred intention, a return to the wisdom of your own nervous system, no longer hijacked by urgency but tuned to peace. You now understand that relationships do not begin when two people meet. They begin in how you prepare for that meeting. They begin in the spaces you clear, the wounds you tend, the energy you cultivate. Abstinence, used consciously, is how we make space for something deeper, for something real. I would remind us, self-mastery is not about suppression, it is about balance. And balance comes from awareness of the body, the breath, the emotions, and the soul. In abstinence, you are not becoming less, you are becoming more whole, more grounded, more radiant in your presence. So when you choose silence, choose it not out of fear, but out of respect for your journey, for your energy, and for the quality of love you are willing to receive. Let that silence shape your discernment. Let it clarify your intention. Let it prepare you not to escape the world, but to enter it with the strength of someone who no longer needs anything from it to feel complete. This is the truth behind abstinence. It is not the absence of desire, it is the elevation of it. It is desire refined, embodied, sacred, and from that sacred space, true connection is born.